really just to shine a light on the UK because we think it's pretty underrated. And that there's quite a lot on our doorstep that people could be accessing regularly. A moment where you absolutely realise the surface level value of a moment or a place or an interaction, and you really enjoy it. And then a couple of weeks or months later down the line, you process it and you realise there's extra value in it. The feeling for me, and I think a lot of people, is it's incomparable, I would say. The more you're lucky enough to be able to get outside and do these things, the more you'll take away from it. And that's, I think, if more people were able to access the outdoors through confidence and through circumstance a lot of the time, there might just be a little bit of more patience and perspective in the world.
If you have ever wanted to understand why we should be asking for nature's help on mindsets, adventures, and more, then you're in the right place. So, welcome to Maximise Nature. Welcome to Maximise Nature. Today's guest is Charlie. Charlie is one half of the Simply Magnificent, the travel project on Instagram. If you have ever wanted to know what the UK wilderness has to offer, then they are a great place to start. From adventuring up in the Highlands, exploring the Lake District, and even co-writing their own book, Achievable Adventures. The travel project is like no other. We are going to dive into the thought process behind their adventures, as well as how he thinks nature can provide the helping hand to people like you and me. Then, we can take the good thoughts and put them in a travel bag, ready to use in our next adventure. So, with that, here is episode 9 of the Maximise Nature Podcast. Let's introduce Charlie to everyone. First of all, thank you so much, Charlie, for coming on. I know you have a really hectic schedule, and we really appreciate it. So, Charlie, can you give us a little insight into who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'm one half, as you touched on there, of the travel project. We essentially, I suppose, are a project focused on getting more people outside more often is our kind of main aim, really. And it's a UK-focused project. We don't take any aeroplanes. I guess that's to try and encourage sustainable travel habits. But at the same time, it's really just to shine a light on the UK because we think it's pretty underrated. And that there's quite a lot on our doorstep that people could be accessing regularly. Rather than sort of having the 1 or 2 trips a year, you could have more. Yeah, we've got a lot of beauty, national parks. We're an island of islands, so there's lots to get stuck into. So yeah, that's what we do. I guess some people would call us photographers, some people would call us videographers, some people would call us influencers, of course. Some people would call us creators. The labels go on and on. I don't mind what people call us, really. That's up to them. But yeah, so we do a bit of I guess storytelling across that space.
You are just you, and you're having fun outdoors. How did your passion for exploring the outdoors in the UK inspire you into nature-based content creation?
That's a great question, I suppose. I mean, initially our project, the travel project, was actually an international project, and through a series of events, I suppose, namely COVID, the classic kind of turning point in a lot of people's perspectives, it moved towards being focused on the UK. It was going sort of that way anyway. But why the UK and my own personal passions? I mean, when I was younger, I went on holiday to Yorkshire a lot with my family, and Scotland. They were the 2 places we went. We'd get in the car and do the drive up there and spend a week or whatever it was, kind of just mucking around, building dens, building fires, swimming, doing all that kind of stuff.
The classics.
Yeah, exactly. But it was really formative, I think, looking back on it, because it gave me a lot of I guess confidence, but also just enjoyment. I just loved it. It was freedom to me. It was adventure, escape, all the things that you associate with it. And then I grew up and got into my teens and 20s and kind of forgot about it, basically, as is a classic story arc, I would imagine. And then just, going out, all the things you do in your 20s. And then it got a bit boring, a bit monotonous, and I started to think, what else is there in life? And yeah, I suppose, long answer, it kind of just came back round, and yeah, it started informing my photography and my work, and my love of storytelling kind of synced up with the love of the UK, basically. And here we are.
I definitely agree with you for the freedom aspect. When I was a lot younger, and very, very luckily, my parents took me up to Ben Nevis when I was, I think, 13. I climbed that, and similar to you with the late teens, early 20s, and the infamous breakout, should we just say that, it kind of gave me the perfect opportunity to really explore what I wanted to do post sixth form, going into uni. And I'd never really had that sort of freedom until then.
Yeah.
So
no, it's interesting. It's quite formative, isn't it? As you say, like it's. I'm trying at the moment. We've got a son, and you're starting to understand, well, on a wider level, which I won't go into now, the kind of the pressures of the responsibility you have to shape that little person into, someone who's happy and does good and all the rest of it. But you realise that going out into the outdoors is extremely impactful for a 1, 2, 3-year-old, because in our experience anyway, you can see him learning confidence and problem solving and playing in a different type of way. So that's very, very conscious of that. But equally, you don't want to, it's an interesting one because you don't want to push it on kids, right? You don't want to put a kid off because you went and had although you got cramp, you had a positive experience up Ben Nevis, but at the same time, I'm sure there's lots of kids that when they were younger, they got taken on walks and it was raining and it was wet and cold and they had a soggy sandwich halfway through and they just thought, oh, I'm never doing this again. This is laborious. This isn't fun, So you do have to be slightly careful. I suppose in some senses, that's one of the things we're trying to do is say, like, look, any soggy sandwich kind of experience you may have had when you were little, give it another go, because I promise you there's some really cool stuff out there. Doesn't matter what budget you have. It doesn't matter what sort of level of adventure you want. It doesn't matter how much time you've got. There is something for everyone out there. So yeah, it's kind of trying to, in many ways, persuade a lot of people who were put off it when they were younger that actually it's all right, the UK, and getting outdoors. So yeah, it's fun.
It's definitely that little bit of persuasion, yet you don't want to overcook it, as it were, because otherwise you'll just end up with someone who doesn't like the outdoors. And I'm not going to lie, we can't really have that because there's too much to gain from it. And it's part of the reason that I've put this podcast together, because I feel like when you're either on your way to work, school, or whatever, you can always just whack this on in your headphones and go from there. And hopefully learn something from it as well. Who or what moments, apart from obviously inspiring your son, inspired you to fully pursue sharing the beauty of the outdoors with as many people as possible?
Gosh, I've actually never been asked that question before. Who and what moments? I mean, I think, again, it's just like a fusion of the things that I love. Like I've always been someone who's into, like, I guess, telling stories. You've got to be careful when you say that, because people think you're a bit of a knob. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. But what I mean by that is, like, I used to be big into illustration and design, and then it progressed to photography. And I think the sort of focus of all of that stuff was, like, communicating, like, I guess, an observation I saw in the world or whatever. And then it's sort of my passion for nature, those two things fused. So I wouldn't say there was necessarily one particular moment that catalyzed it. But once I was off and running and doing it, there's been countless moments along the way where I've been incredibly inspired creatively by the outdoors and the experience I've had there. I mean, most recently, we just got back from, we've actually just gone to Scotland twice this year actually already, but just over New Year's, we were up in the Highlands and it was snowing and there was no one up there, and it was an incredible experience. And it was great on every single level, but in reference to this question, it was another one of those moments where I was like, I'm really glad that I do what I do, because I'm able to kind of, I guess, process the experience by photographing it, capturing it, and then putting it together into like a film and photography and all that kind of, I suppose, content. Some people would be like, oh, well, I wouldn't I wouldn't want to be looking through the lens of a camera. I'd want to be just experiencing it. I, in principle, understand that. I completely understand that there are people like that. But for me, it's not really like that. So I find a huge amount of inspiration from being there and documenting it, and analysing it through a kind of a literal lens, I suppose. So yeah, it's been a whole series of events throughout my life that have sort of led to that, basically, and inspired that passion. So yeah, lots and lots of moments.
I think you've pretty much summed up what everyone said that I've had on over the last couple of episodes. For me anyway, it's a sort of art form, not just get out and experience it. You will learn, I promise you, as I'm sure you know, learn so much from even 10, 50 minutes outside. And it's really important for me anyway to sort of clear my head from everything, from work and everything. And I'm sure, like you said, your son will benefit hugely from it. And one thing I really like to live by is we are not apart from nature. We are a part of nature, because realistically, without the great outdoors, in my opinion anyway, we are literally just people on a tiny planet that wouldn't have anything if we didn't have nature.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point, isn't it? It's one of those ones where you don't want to go too deep, otherwise someone with a brain size of mine will get a little bit overwhelmed. But when you think about it, as you touched on there, everything else was just made up, really. We're sort of going around in these made up lives. But then as soon as you go outside, it is as real as it gets. You can argue. So there's a connection there that is offered that is totally different. You can't compete with it. Some people less into it, and that's cool. But when you get a kind of a pure hit, if you want to call it that, or a dose of it that is incredible for whatever reason, whether it be epic or unique, or the weather conditions were just right, or whatever it may be, the feeling for me, and I think a lot of people, is it's incomparable, I would say, which is pretty cool.
That feeling of, what's the word, incomparability, I get that as well from running, which is just run, as they call it all over social media, the runner's high. But I think that can transcend through every sport or outdoor activity, like you said. Yeah, and it's kind of that I'm here now. We're chilling. We're good. Let's move.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that, man.
What's your thought process / mentality when exploring goes wrong, or down the wrong path, as it were?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, in all honesty, since we've reined in our adventures and they're UK only, you don't have any, because nothing's achievable adventure, right? We rarely these days find ourselves in any form of gnarly harem-scarum situation. That I at the moment even struggling to think of one. Usually what it is, which is incredibly I guess small on the scale, is the weather will just turn on you. We've had that, untold amount of times. With a kid, that becomes an incredibly different challenge. And one that you have
can imagine.
You have to think about a lot. But with our kid, I've climbed a few mountains in the UK, and the weather's turned, and you've thought, this is a bit more serious. All of a sudden, but mentality wise, I think it's roll with the punches. Easy to say for someone who's only going to really deal with the weather, but I think there's an interesting point in there, perhaps around don't expect the plan to be smooth and stuck to. We never make a plan and go, right, this is rigid, we're going to absolutely do this, then do that, and do that. Not going to happen. It needs to be malleable by design, because things are going to change. You're going to get a flat tire. The weather's going to turn. If we're out with Sonny, our boy, he's going to have a tantrum, or he's going to crap himself, throw up. And that is just the reality of it. And we say to people the whole time, you have to have that flexibility in there. And then when things do go wrong, you are sort of from the jump relaxed about it, because it's factored into your thinking. So your mind frame is just okay, that's fine. That was literally almost forecast in the way we were approaching this. But I do think there's something
pun intended.
Pun intended. And I think for parents especially, which I don't want to talk too directly to parents because it's relatively niche, I suppose, but it's quite a good thing that this being in the outdoors, things change quite quickly. With a kid, things change quite quickly. So if you do want to combine those two things, don't expect things to go according to plan the whole time, you know.
Yeah, for me anyway, that's part of the fun. When they don't go to plan, it's like you said earlier, the sort of puzzle solving ability really comes into play then, especially with things like our favourite, the weather. It can be quite challenging, but at the same time, I believe anyway, the more challenging something is, the more fun it is.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, you touched on an interesting point there. Like, I think one of the things I shy away from in life is that I don't like repetition huge amounts. I don't like predictability huge amounts. And I think getting outside into the outdoors offers you a kind of escape from that, because you're not sure what's going to happen. Even if it's in small things like the weather, that is more exciting to me personally, I would say.
My coach has always been like, just prepare for what you can. And what does he say? Oh, I can't even remember what it's something like prepare to roll out, because you never know what's going to come around the corner, something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Got you. Yeah. No, I think it's sensible advice. It was good advice for life, right? And it's one of the things they say about the outdoors is there are a lot of parallels, and same with sport. There's a lot of parallels for the wider world. So I often find myself going out into the outdoors, whatever the occasion may be, whoever I'm with, and it can go to according to plan or it can go completely tits up. But a lot of the time I'll take a little lesson away with me that I might not even realize how appropriate and applicable it is until I get 2 weeks, a month down the line, and I realize the importance of that one little moment. And I think the outdoors is peppered with those little lessons that you can kind of pick up as you go. That's another point of value that I think is huge for people, that perhaps is a little bit underrated. That people, we say, like, we want people to head out, or show people how to head out on trips that where the impact lasts far longer than any suntan.
That's brilliant. Yeah.
Being a reference to people who go away, as we used to, I suppose, to an extent, and go just to try and get a suntan, and then you come back 2 weeks later, you're back in the office, and you haven't got a suntan anymore, and it's got a sort of slightly hollow feeling. Whereas you can go out and it may piss for a week in Scotland, but you will have a few moments that you'll probably pull on and help steer your decision making for a while to come, if not forever. And I've certainly had some lessons about perspective and how I view the world that I'm still using 4, 5, 6 years down the line. So there's a lot of value in it. I've
been really lucky with the places I've been able to go to. I mean, it's not in the UK, but I went to Zambia to volunteer at a kids' orphanage, and one of my best memories was it was going around Victoria Falls, and I just remember looking up and seeing this massive waterfall, which was just my brain didn't really comprehend it until I left. It got to about 2 weeks after I came back, and I was like, oh damn, I did that. Sick.
Yeah.
Let's go again.
Yeah, well, processing experiences is a funny thing, isn't it? Because, like you said there, a lot of the time it does take a while. Although sometimes what I feel with slightly less, that's almost the definition of epic, isn't it, in terms of scale and whatnot. But what I find a lot of the time is that you have a moment where you absolutely realize the surface level value of a moment or a place or an interaction, and you really enjoy it. And then a couple of weeks or months later down the line, you process it and you realize there's extra value in it, sort of layered value to the experience. So yeah. I mean, I just think that the more you're lucky enough to be able to get outside and do these things, the more you'll take away from it. And that's, I think, if more people were able to access the outdoors through confidence and through circumstance a lot of the time, there might just be a little bit of more patience and perspective in the world, potentially.
I completely agree with you on that. When did I film it? Back in December, I had Niall McCann, who's a National Geographic explorer, and he was literally reiterating the same thing. If we get more people out into nature, things will definitely just go up. There won't be this.
And it's also interesting that like the secondary effect or joint third primary effect is that people will have an appreciation and want to protect it, because things aren't going great on that front at the moment, shall we say?
No.
And I was talking to someone the other day about this. I wasn't like overly passionate about sustainability and environmental protection, let's say 10 years ago. And I think that's for a couple of factors. Probably I was a bit young and just cared about myself. But also certainly since I've been going out into these places and hearing about the impacts from the front line, so to speak, from these hugely passionate people, you realise that, my approach has changed quite dramatically. And if others, got to go out and do stuff as we're talking about, then perhaps they would have a bit more of a sort of guardian feel to their lives. They wanted their relationship with nature. So I think it's I mean, in summary, we should get outside if they can.
If lockdown taught us anything, it was definitely that. What are some of the challenges you have faced during the planning, trekking, and reflecting stages of your wilderness adventures, and how did you overcome them? / what's one massive thing you learned from? It can be one adventure, it can be multiple. What's one thing that stood out?
So from the end to end, I guess we would call it production because of the way we approach it. So we did a thing called 52-52 where we did 52 UK adventures in 2 weeks, which was just like sounded really cool, right? That's why we did it, because we were like, that's
nice.
But actually, it was a lot of work to produce it.
So
I guess it's an interesting question. I can only really answer it, obviously, from a personal perspective, in the sense that like we are often putting in a layer of work on top of it. So it might be that we have a client, and we're trying to shoot let's say like an outdoor product, like a jacket or something. So what we've learned is that we need to be quite planned in the build up. But as to my earlier point, you have to be ready for that plan to, not go completely to script. But I think we've learned that like one of the most useful tools in the build up to a trip is trying to connect with locals. So it might be that you know people there. It might be that you use the internet in one form or another. Social medias are good for that. But if you can connect with a local in a place you've never really been before, they're quite literally going to know it better than anyone else, as is saying. So we find that's really useful from a production perspective. I've never done a trip where I'm like, I wish we'd done that differently. Which perhaps is because our attitude is just get stuck in and say yes to everything that you outside of obvious danger. Just have a yes attitude, and that kind of guides a path of momentum that leads you from one great place to another. And it might be that you bump into, as we have done before, a fisherman who says, if you want some fresh seafood, come and meet me here tomorrow. And then you go to that place tomorrow, and it's completely unplanned in the initial idea, but all of a sudden you're buying, you're having a fire on the beach with fresh prawns in an island off Scotland, and you're like, great. The way to get to that is by being inquisitive and searching out people, conversations, and experiences. So I don't know, does that answer the question?
Yeah, it definitely does.
Okay.
And it does.
No, but I mean the other side is the other side of the process. So upon reflection, looking back, like I never really look back with like any degree of regret on them all, because they're I've come to learn they're all individual experiences that you can't replicate really, and that's the beauty of them. That's like, so I don't stress like, that was so. I mean, every now and then, if it really rains, you'll be like, it's frustrating. You wish it. But that's an obvious one. But the process for me is it's more like from the boring back end of it. Like if it's because we own a content studio where we shoot just purely for clients in the outdoors a lot of the time, and there are lots of learnings to take from that. From won't bore you now, from treatments to shot lists to just like tweaking little elements. But from a travel project perspective, it's always just, I guess, embracing the individual nature of each of the adventures, and like knowing that, you know, that was a moment in time, and that it won't be replicated by us again, and that's the beauty of it, really.
Yeah, I'd definitely say that your whole point about connectivity and just living in the moment is exactly the mindset I'm trying to put forward on not only this podcast, but whenever or whoever I bump into, wherever I am in the UK or wherever. What would you say is the best thing about getting out into nature and away from the busyness of the cities or really compact areas?
The best thing about it?
Yeah.
Well, for me, it's, and this is when I get into my phrase repetition, but the kind of always on screen-based, full inbox nature of life in 2025 now is full on, isn't it? It's full on. It's kind of all encompassing. Like, I have a screen addiction problem, which is the same as lots of people do, you know, whether or not they want to admit it or not. And when you get out, or when I get out into the outdoors, your phone becomes nowhere near front and center of your mind. You're completely engrossed in the experience of being outdoors. And it almost feels like clarity is achieved for me, you know, every time I get to a moment that's where I've gone from, let's say, waking up in a city to watching sunset by the coast. At that moment when the sun's looking down over the coast is one of the best feelings, because you just feel like escaped the I don't want to say matrix, because that sounds almost like conspiratorial.
That's it, yeah.
It's hectic, you know what I mean? It's like that whole rat race, you know, which I by the way, I quite enjoy the rat race, but it's great to have the luxury of getting away from it, I would suggest.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same as you. But I'm kind of addicted to my phone, so I have to put the time limits on it, etc.
Yeah.
But I definitely agree with you. If I could, and I did a couple. Where was I? Oh, I can't even remember now. But I was somewhere outdoors, and I hadn't had my phone for, I think, a day or two. Ugh, it was so nice just to switch it off, chill, and just take it in.
Interestingly, I think, or we think collectively, that that's the way the trend's going to go. Well, there are two ways of looking at it. So, like, we're going to become more and more addicted to these things, right? The screens are everywhere. But at some point, which has already begun, there will be a rebellion against that behaviour. So, you know, we've got to be thinking about the next generation of children. You've got the next generation who, you know, are smoking less, they're drinking less. All of a sudden, it's not cool to do these things. Whereas when I was growing up, like, having a beer and smoking a fag, there was nothing cooler, you know. And then all of a sudden, that's changed. That's a rebellion to the generation prior to you, but also the system, if you want to call it that. So it'd be interesting to see. It'd be interesting to see, like, the next generation. Are they going to be completely hooked on it? Or are they going to look at their parents? Are they going to look at me and go like, oh, that was a bit, they took it too far, you know, it's time to strip back. And I really hope that is what happens. And I do think that it will happen increasingly. You've got places that offer, you know, you can go and stay for however long, you lock your phone in a box. There are restaurants that do that similar concept now. And there's a movement away from them. So I like to think that we'll get into a situation where moderation becomes a bit more commonplace, but you've got to fight against some pretty powerful marketing budgets to get away from that. But yeah, it's a funny thing for me to be saying in a way, because you know, obviously we make our money in a large part for people being on their phones, but it's just still we kind of like to think that we act as a sort of gateway out of social, so we're kind of trying to get people to hopefully watch our videos and be inspired to then go out at the weekend. So we, in our mind, that kind of balances it a little bit, perhaps.
Yeah, I'd definitely say with the content I'm making, it's 100% the same. Like, for me anyway, or whoever I've seen, like, come away from a really bad place. You have to do it like little and often. You can't just go bang off. It just won't work. But yeah, it's so encouraging to not only see that people are starting not to smoke as much, run more, just head outdoors and head away from your phones and spend time with family, friends outdoors. And I feel like, to be honest, I was a little bit scared for my brothers. I mean, my brother is 2 years younger than me, but he obviously had a phone. He had like phone, computer games and stuff 2 years earlier than when I would have done, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does,
and to see that he's now like back enjoying the outdoors. Like he went to the Lake District 2 or 3 weeks ago, which is something I never thought he'd do, but now he's done it and he's actually enjoyed it.
It feels like, one of our kind of key aims 4 or 5 years ago when we started doing our Achievable Adventure series was to try and make it a bit cooler. And I don't want to use that word like as if, like we're the last word in cool, because we're not, but it's more just like a little bit more like it was a little bit more accessible to a wider audience. It wasn't looked at, frowned at as some boring, old fart activity to go for a hike. And I see a lot online now of young people to me, getting out there and hiking, wearing all the kit and stuff, and it's become a trend, but like good trend if you ask me.
I think for me, a trend can either stay a trend or you can switch it up permanently, if that makes sense. And I think definitely something that's really, I guess I'm really lucky to have is my parents are how old, like 70, late 60s in terms of how old they are, sorry. And it's really nice that, they're that bit older, but they understand what's really important that little bit more, because obviously 20, 30, or I'm not trying to offend anyone, but like that later generation, not breaking point, was at the turning point between outdoors and technology. So I guess I'm really lucky in that sense that my parents not raised us right, but raised us in a way that will benefit me a really positive way.
No, it's cool. I mean, I was talking to Jess the other day about how like actually our generation, so we're 37 now, so 87 we were born in. We are a unique generation in the sense that I have very conscious memories of not having social media. Like I grew up, the whole of school didn't really have it. And then at the back end of my teens, so like 1920, Facebook came in, and then it started to go from there. But then, so I try and I guess maybe spin it to myself that I had the luxury of not having it when I was a kid and all the pressures and all the rest of it. But then I was a working professional when it came in, so I was able to understand it from a kind of marketing perspective. And then in many ways, I look at it, our output as a fusion of those two things. So I understand the power of it as a messaging tool and as a way of reaching people. But equally, I am very aware that the world doesn't need it. And some of the best things in life come out of, boredom, which is hard to find these days. Being bored is very rare, and you think changes the way you engage with things if you're bored. But then also, spending time, which I guess is connected to boredom, but like extended periods of time outdoors, just existing for a day outdoors, where it's hiking and maybe having a fire and a swim. There's a long periods of time that have a different effect on you. That if you're rushing into the office, you got to go and meet a mate after work. You've got 15 minutes for your lunch. You watch 10, 15 snippet seconds of Instagram or TikTok or whatever it may be. That's a different way of interacting with the world. It's far less impactful, isn't it? So it's a really interesting topic. We'll have to reconvene in 5-10 years time and see who was right.
Definitely. I feel like we'll both be right.
Oh, I'm always right.
Same.
No, yes, I think I'm always right. I'm not, so we'll see.
Yeah, it's the way it is, isn't it? There are so many examples out there of why going beyond the front door is such a good idea. What would you say is the best thing about getting out into nature, apart from the reasons you stated?
I guess, a kind of combination of everything we've spoken about. I feel like it's good I think we touched on perspective, but like one of the things I always find is that it allows you to escape the thought processes that might be kind of on a bit of a hamster wheel in your head.
Yeah.
And it might be something as simple as a problem at work, creatively, or a stress you have in your family life or your relationship, or whatever it may be. I find that when you are in one environment, living a quite repetitive sort of 5-7 day cycle, and you're not breaking out of a thought process, it's hardly surprising because you're not changing up any of the factors that, you know, that impact you. And then you go out and you spend just a morning, you know, just a walk, just a little swim, whatever it may be. I often find I'll be like, I'll get out of the water and I'll be like, it's almost eureka, except they're not like world-changing discoveries, but they're just moments where something just clicks, like, oh right, yeah, obviously that's what I should do, or that's what that person meant, or you know, this is the idea that's gonna change this project, or whatever it may be. And so that's huge for me. You know, I've just been away. I've just started. We're just starting, Jess and I, to go away with different people this year for a variety of reasons. But it's quite interesting to play with the formula of who you go away with. So I've just been to Wales with 4 of my oldest friends, and the idea was, well, long story short, it was actually for my stag do was the original thing.
Nice.
And people, the boys were like, oh, do you want to go? And all sorts of stag do ideas floated that were all around, you know, getting drunk and whatever, going to bars in London or whatever it may be. And I was actually like, no, I'd actually like to do something where we kind of like conquer something and do something as a shared experience, just so that we could really catch up and also just like feel that share that experience, basically.
Yeah.
So we went to Wales and we climbed Cedar Idris and we swam in the lake, and it was a bit of a sort of like shambles because it was raining and nothing went according to plan, but it was brilliant. And and that was, and all of the boys who are my age and they're confident and they're successful in their own ways, but they were all just like, wow, I didn't actually know that sort of thing existed in terms of an experience. And then I'm going away with a friend next weekend who's recently had a bit of a tricky time. And the idea is just to take these people that I have this history with and these amazing experiences and this friendship, but take them into a different environment, i.e. the outdoors, and see how that connects us and see whether that can heal certain wounds or you know, allow us to catch up and bond in a way that you just couldn't really in the pub or even a round of golf or whatever it may be that people do to catch up with their mates. So yeah, that there's a long answer. I think it just allows you to access almost a different side of your personality, I would argue. And affects your entire view of situations that you, I suppose, look through one lens at for maybe years. So it's interesting.
It sort of just goes back to what you were saying earlier about that hamster wheel effect.
Yeah.
And what I've always been raised up by is that it's good for change. If you try and avoid change, then good luck.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you will change, like whether it be seconds, every second's different. So just try and go with it and don't fight it, because again, it's really good to like switch up, not the narrative, but who you're spending time with. So it's so you're not just like, oh shit, I'm stuck. When you're really not, you just haven't had that opportunity to switch little things and spend a certain amount of time with different people.
Yeah, I agree. It's really interesting.
I don't know about you, but whenever I go on like a hike or something, I always like a sweet. What is your like? I mean, like I said earlier, Mars bars are.
Oh
yeah,
okay. Yeah,
Mars so good. But like, right. What's your like? Exactly. Yeah.
I don't really have a go-to, but like it doesn't
have to be like a.
For me, it's more. It has to be something. So that's a kind of a crap answer, but I'll elaborate. It's like Jess and I love just creating a moment it sounds a bit sort of watching, but just like having a sort of objective, which is like, we're going to go up there, and like often we'll make like a bap with like, it might have, halloumi and tomatoes in it, and it might taste like, if you were to give it to someone at a restaurant, they'd be like, what is this? But you eat it at the top of a mountain, having just climbed up there, and also knowing that you've taken the stuff up there as well, and you eat it with a bit of a sunset or sunrise, wherever it may be, or even if it's just raining a bit. There's something about that I love. I think it turns often what could be classed as just like a little stroll or a walk in the park into an event, and something that takes a little bit longer. There's a process to it. There's a rhythm to it. So to answer your question, it's kind of like just anything. It's like tea in a thermos. Like, we're going to take that everywhere, which is a sort of predictably British thing to say. But again, it's about about ritual, right? It's about creating little moments, and I suppose it's about sharing as well. At the end of the day, we're lucky enough to have each other on a lot of these trips, and it kind of has a really small bonding element to it. Again, when I was with the boys, we had a bit of food up there, up the mountain, and there's just something about being all cold together and then all having a drink, and there's something about that. I'm trying to think of what my Mars bar would be.
It doesn't. I was going to say it doesn't need to be specific.
I'm just trying to think. Now I don't really eat anymore. No, it's fine. I'm just thinking, what is my go-to chocolate bar? I should have an answer for that. It's actually a bit irresponsible of me to not have that come out immediately. I'll probably go with I was big into what was I big into? Cadbury's nut bar, no raisins, just nut. So I'll probably go with that if I had to pick one thing. But I stopped eating chocolate, so it's even more boring.
Yeah.
But yeah, I highly encourage everyone to take some, even if it's a pot noodle, mate. Like, honestly, even if it's a pot, just get them. They're pretty good actually for that event. Or even those, have you had the fire? Are they called fire pot? They're the camping food sachets. They're basically like pot noodles. They have all your all the proteins and all the calories you need and stuff like that. They taste fine. They're like space food, but they give you the energy boost, but they also give you that moment. So
anything that gives you a moment, perfect.
Exactly.
Lovely. Yeah. Speaking of sweet treats, let's swap some treats, like your incredible meals, for some truths in a game I like to call the Sweet Truth. So, Charlie, your task is to tell me 3 things, 1 truth and 2 falsehoods about any experience you've had in nature across the UK. Either I get the sweet victory of picking the truth, or you get the sweet victory for yourself anyway, for persuading me to pick incorrectly.
Right. So do you want me to tell you 3 from one experience?
3 from any, doesn't have to be 1.
Okay. Right. So I'm trying to recall. So there was a time when we were hiking across some land that was quite clearly marked as a farmer's, a bridleway or a path.
Yeah.
In Northumberland a few years back. And long story short, ended up getting chased is a bit strong, but certainly escorted off the land by a farmer who I think had potentially, this is defamation, but maybe have had a drink. Another time I was up in Scotland, and it was a sunset, and we saw I guess a herd of cows go down to the sea along the beach, and then jump in the water and swim around. Never seen that before. That was extraordinary. And then the final time we were in Northern Ireland, and we saw an eagle, and this is an exaggeration, but it as good as ate a mouse in front of us. It actually ended up not eating the mouse, but it swooped down, and it must have only been 10 meters away. And I'm going to say ate it, but it didn't actually. So yeah, those are 3.
For story purposes, it ate the mouse. Perfect.
Yeah.
Just quickly, have you seen any cow-related films with your son recently?
Cow-related films with our son?
Yeah.
I haven't. What, have you got a recommendation?
No, but I just thought of the cow swimming and was like, is it
I
Charlotte's
see.
Web? Is it not? No.
Well, no, I wouldn't be able to tell you what I watched with my son because I put it on and my brain switches into
Stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it switches off basically immediately.
Yeah,
I thought there'd be some animated cows kicking about. I could have been bored.
Yeah.
So
Shaun the Sheep kind of words. The last one was you being chased by a farmer, right?
That's it, yeah.
Where did you say it was?
Northumberland.
Northumberland. Okay. How big were the cows?
Well, big enough to be. Well, I'm a little bit scared. Oh wait, with the cow, there were cows in Northumberland as well. By the way,
Yeah.
Big enough to be scary. I'm quite scared of cows. Like not in an actual scared way, but like more of a respect way. I think people die from cows, don't they? Getting trampled by cows. So all cows are big to me as long as they're over a certain height. They're petrifying.
Literally, where like when I'm back home, I go for a run over like this common area. Mm-hmm. They're quite literally up to here. I mean, like, okay, let them be, let them chill.
Yeah, it's too big.
Yeah. Were you the only one who was in the field when you were scared away by the farmer? Or
Jess and I, yeah, we were the only ones there. Yeah, although we tend to always be the only ones there because we've got the privilege of being able to go places on weekdays, which is a bit of a game changer.
It is. Every part of me wants the cow swimming to be true.
Mm-hmm.
So, you love cows, though. To be fair.
Yeah.
Mind you, you do travel the UK, and like, you know what? Screw it. I'm gonna go with the cows in the sea.
Yeah, bingo! You did it. Correct. Yes. Winner. You're good. Oh, well, I'm a bad liar. Yeah, man. We saw that just off the Isle of Mull about 4 years ago, and it was absolutely. Actually, probably encapsulates a lot of what we've been speaking about today in terms of an experience that was just a moment in time that we were just lucky enough to be there for that moment. It was beautiful weather. We were wild camping up there. They were just on our doorstep, metaphorically speaking, and it was extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. There must have been about 20 of them, 25, 30. They all went for a little swim and then got out and went back up into the hills. And we were like, wow, that was quite something to witness. It's extraordinary.
Lovely. Now, Charlie, for the listeners, when you get to the viewpoint or whatever high point of whatever adventure you've gone on in the UK, what do you remember about that moment? Just so people listening can live the experience vicariously.
I feel it's like perhaps most prominent for me is a sense of calm, but I don't necessarily mean conventional calmness. More of a like
peaceful kind of
peaceful, it kind of. I guess you feel like you're meant to be there. Again, back to what we spoke about before about how the natural world is where we're meant to be. But I don't ever think of it overtly like, I'm meant to be in this moment. It's more just a kind of below surface level sort of buzz, I suppose, that I tend to get. And it's addictive as well, in a healthy way. I want to go and chase that feeling of across different landscapes and sort of points across the UK. So it's a very, very specific feeling, and one that I hope that everyone gets to experience at least a few times in their life.
How does it feel to be inspiring the next generation of explorers, and why is it so important for you about disproving the beliefs that being outdoors in a place like the UK is so quote unquote boring? So I mean, I hope we're inspiring some people, as you touched on there, and if we are, then that's cool. I mean, we get some messages on Instagram and email and all the various different ways in which you can contact us that are
incredibly encouraging for us, because it's very cool. I mean, ultimately, Instagram's a digital medium, and what we're talking about is a physical experience. So when we have people message us on Instagram and say, we did this adventure, they might have bought our book, or they might have just seen something on Instagram, they've gone and done it, and then they take the time to write to us. And in some cases, people write, like what I would describe as quite long accounts of the experience. And sometimes it's like it was big for them because they just had a kid, or they had been going for a stressful time, or we encouraged them to go somewhere out of season, or whatever it may be. Like that, those are some of the most, I think it's the most rewarding thing, like, because it's just very cool. It's very cool to hear that. And it's also quite surreal. I sometimes, when we get messages like that, I'm almost a bit shocked. I'm like, I can't believe anyone's paying attention to our stuff.
Yeah,
it's quite weird in many ways. So yeah, that feeling's very cool, and I guess it's also like it's energizing as well, because you're like, okay, if it's resonating, if people are going out and doing it, that's a cool feeling. And when it comes to like younger, next generation thing, I suppose I'd love to just be part of the conversation and shaping it so that we do get to a stage where, as discussed earlier, the next generation look at the UK as this sort of map of possibilities, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I just feel like, okay, well, I've got 2 days this weekend and £100, or I've got a night this week and there's no one to go with, and I don't have any money, but I'm going to go and do this. So I feel like communicating the variety and the possibility is a big part of what we do, and if that has an impact to the next generation, then I'll be chuffed.
Yeah, that for me is part of the reason why I do my Instagram reels. Like, I caption them, maximize the midweek for a reason. Like you said earlier, some of the best ideas you have will come from boredom. Yeah. And for me, like, I won't be bored in nature, but I'll be inspired by it instead of being bored, sat at my desk.
Well, you're not distracted, isn't it? Like with phones and the modern world, you're distracted constantly. Whereas in nature, your mind can just wander in ways that it just doesn't have the breathing space to in other times. So, yeah, it's about maximizing that time, isn't it? Because we all live our own lives and have our own stresses and whatnot, but ultimately, we all probably want to look back with thinking we've maximized what we had. And I think you can get that, by looking at the UK as a map of possibilities, and you don't have to go that far, basically.
Yeah. Just before I ask you the final question, where can people find out about the work you and Jess do, and essentially where can people find you and learn more about what you do?
Is on Instagram at the moment, due to sort of book contracts and whatnot. Our website is as good as redundant, but we're also about to launch a digital map, actually, which is a series of guides for people to be able to see basically everywhere that we've gone over the past 5 years, which is quite a big body of work for us to do. Yeah, and then we put them together, so that'd be quite a good way to, I guess, get a flavour of what we're all about. But Instagram, our book, which obviously sort of got a plug whenever we can, but that's quite a good, if you want to pay. But Instagram, free, you get a flavour of what we're all about, and then from there you can decide whether you want to delve deeper into our world.
One last task: can you write down? Doesn't have to be now, or message me on Instagram or something. One nature-based phrase that I must get into my next podcast without my guest knowing. And the last question I want to ask you is: did you find or identify? Yeah, that's the word. Identify the phrase I used.
No, is the answer.
Perfect.
You've had a few. What can you reveal it?
Yep. That makes me 9 for 9. I'm very happy with that. Okay, so this was from Dr. Niall McCann, who I said earlier about the National Geographic. And if the listeners, or indeed you want to go find out more, just listen to the podcast before this. It's episode 8 and it's out on It's out on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Music. So the phrase is, drumroll please, we are not apart from nature, we are part of nature.
Okay, cool. Yeah. It's a good quote, that. Yeah. Is that her? I've heard something similar to that before. It's who was I listening to the other day talk about this with extreme clarity? Can't remember. That's how clear it was. But it's a really good point, isn't it? It's like we are always meant to be able. We put up loads of barriers, loads of divides, and actually, it's an interesting quote because I think it kind of is so spot on that. But I think for one reason or another, it's become kind of a bit airy-fairy or washy to say things like that. And I think that's how people kind of get them out of their men. Oh, it's just sort of a bit hippie, that, isn't it? But actually, it's not. It's not. And I think perhaps what part of our mission and lots of people's missions, I'm sure, is to try and make that kind of sentiment more acceptable and mainstream, and not this kind of like sort of peace and love attitude. It's just like it's a fact. So yeah, no, you slipped it in nicely. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you. Charlie, thank you so much. The work that the Travel Project do is truly inspiring. And thanks again for joining me on the Maximise Nature podcast. Until next time, get out and explore what's beyond your front door. Goodbye, guys.
Nice, man. Oh, get out and explore what's beyond your front door. That's good.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you follow Maximise Nature on Instagram for more nature-based content. See you next time.